on the Spintron, we're looking for valve separation, right? We're just looking for the valve train to separate. So what is the limit? The limit is, does it separate in a way that you like? Because we can't say no separation is the best, because we know people are lobbing cams, like, in overhead valve stuff where they have limited cam bores, they're actually lobbing the cam over the top in order.
So I wanted you to bring that up today.
Yeah,
You got to back up. Like if we're all following you through this exercise with velocity and jerk and lift, and then we have to talk about prescribed loss of control, where this you're lofting the valve away from the cam, so you have the opportunity to get more lift in a dynamic state than in a steady state.
right.
So are you lofting cams in your arena right now, or no?
Am I intentionally lobbing cams? No. Am I lobbing cams? Yes. So like for example, on the Spintron at super high RPM, the ridiculous, like we're talking in the range of ridiculous. Like I'm on the other end,
13.
right? So 12,
Okay.
you know, um, but you get some. I'm getting some shapes where it's literally like a motorcycle jump, right?
It's amazing.
Like if you're jumping motorcycles, it's like you got one side that launches you in the air, right? And the other side's a little bit more gradual, that kind of catches you, scoops you.
Yep.
We should
We've
have
seen that on the Spintron.
you should have some real examples to show him. It looks familiar. I mean, even on the close side, you
We
you
aren't
can.
at the Spintron episode yet.
Uh,
Jay's jumping on the bit for that one. We're
Oh man,
getting,
I want to be out there for the Spintron. So
yeah,
pretty bad.
they're setting up a coyote for the Spintron right now, so you can get your rocks off on that.
That'll be cool.
Yeah. A couple of things here. This section here is all positive, obviously positive this way, negative this way. This section here, this negative section, is what the valve spring actually controls. Because on this side, over here, everything is compressing, right? The valve spring's not trying to stay attached; it's getting compressed, right? Once it hits here, the valve train wants to separate. So it's like the cam is opening and it's accelerating. It's accelerating from here all the way to here, and then at this point it starts to slow down, right? So you'll see this 0 point on acceleration coincides with max velocity. So the velocity is speeding up all the way up until that point, and then it gets to this point. Oops. It gets to this point, and then this area here between between the two max velocity points right there. This area starts to separating. It wants to separate. This is the part. This negative acceleration is the part that the spring actually is controlling, right? Because when it's compressed, it's not going to separate. It's only when it's releasing.
Right.
Okay, so you can design stuff with lower accelerations. You design stuff with higher accelerations. Obviously, something with the higher acceleration would need more spring. Lower acceleration, less spring. And then if you had, let's say you had 3 different cams that all had the same negative acceleration, as long as the RPMs were the same, you can run the same valve springs. It's essentially the same. So like, we'll talk about it. I don't know if we're going to put it up for people to learn, but like in Jamie's car, I have new stuff where I'm really sort of pushing beyond. Right. And then Jamie, you talked about On the closing side, things are rough on the closing side.
Yeah,
Like
you can really see it in the real high acceleration stuff as of recent. You could see on the closing side where the spring clearly can't control that change in acceleration, and it you can sort of see that lob that you drew earlier. It sort of happens the opposite way on close, where it clearly shows. I mean, it's clear to identify at this point now where the spring is just not in control.
is it on the opening? Is it in this? Is it in this area or is it in this
It's
area?
it's right in that area, so it's on the close. We normally see it
It's up
on the
here.
close.
So your interpretation is acceleration. My interpretation is the seating velocity is too high. So you're probably bouncing.
Yep,
You know, you're probably pounding out seats, splitting lash caps,
which we've seen.
right?
Yep,
Because it's a jackhammer effect.
Well, that's to be expected, right? Because as you pass through the jerk and you're going up in velocity, you're gaining spring. You're gaining the spring is trying to control that, but when you're coming off and closing the valve, you're losing you're losing spring. You're losing pressure on the spring. So isn't it going to be more prone when it sets it down?
We have to talk about ramps. For example, this here, right? Earlier we defined this as the ramp between peak acceleration and the seat, right?
Yes.
So this this shape here is called the constant velocity ramp. And what I want to do is by the time I get to the lash, wherever that lash point is, I want to be in an area where this is seating velocity. I want to be in an area where the seating velocity is low enough for the application that I'm doing it for. So, for example, the most extreme cams are going to be in drag racing because this stuff only needs to last a few seconds at a time, right? Road racing, we would have gentler seating velocities. Drag racing has more aggressive seating velocities. Right? And then the seating velocity, there's not only the velocity that we see here in degrees, but you actually have an RPM that would actually give you a true seating velocity on the seat. Right. So you just kind of have limits. Like I have a chart. It's one of the books that I have. I have a chart. It's like if you're going to spin to 12,000 RPM, you need to have a seating velocity of this if you're doing road racing, and of that if you're doing drag racing. And I tend to be even lower than those. When the seating velocities are really, really high, you'll even hear it in a stock engine. It'll just sound like a typewriter. That's the typewriters. Like when you hear the valve train ticking, that's just high seating velocity. So, like, too big a lash can cause a higher seating velocity because your lash point would be there at a higher velocity. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
another term that we need to write down and really define lash. People. I think most of the audience, we need to sort of get granular and explain. I think we can probably talk. We probably have one entire episode just on lash and the effects of lash on the cam as a whole. I mean, discussions that we've had with lash versus duration, changing the actual duration of the cam with strictly using lash, and then the effects of that now looking at it, how that affects jerk. There's a lot of, I think, terminology that we need to note and define to help users, because lash is something that we throw around all the time, right? It's on every cam card, it's everywhere. And the general audience just knows I need to set my lash here, but they don't understand why they need to set, or what the rule of thumb is and what lash is actually doing in this equation.
Well,
Well,
how important lash is, like, it's one of the things that, especially in an adjustable valve train, the end user has control of. And if he messes it up, there's a ton of repercussions.
Yeah.
For sure. And it also helps in testing phases give a general idea of what direction we need to go in. I mean, just increasing the lash in our current stuff, shortening up the duration, and watching in real time the effects of that change in lash and duration.
The lash in my world is more like I'm designing with an understanding of where the lash clearance is going to be. So, like for example, on the what is the lash clearance on a 2JZ?
Like the factory spec is 6 to 10 on the intake and 10 to 14 on the exhaust. Aftermarket cams are like 10, 12.
10, 12. And then have you measured what the lash is after the engine's grown? Do we know what it's?
Yeah, but it's been a minute. It doesn't grow up a ton like an all aluminum pushrod engine. You can get quite a bit of growth. Um, there's not a big change there.
Yeah. So, for example, like on a K, if I designed it, for me, lash is a target that I design for. So, like on a K, let's say I design so it could seat anywhere between 14, 15 thousandths to like 7, 8 thousandths. I just have to make sure that the seating velocities in that range are not too high.
Does that situation create a bit of a design issue? Do you have to restrict your design at all, knowing that you have to give the end users a window to operate in because no one's going to set it perfect every time? You can't count on them to set it perfect every time. Is that a concern of yours?
Oh, well, that's what I'm talking about. Like I set it up so if I design it for like 7, 8 thousandths lash, I'll make sure that it could still seat adequately at 15 thousandths.
Okay, so you're making now. Is that necessarily a concession? Could you give Jamie something different than you can give Joey Smith because you know Jamie's going to be on the money with his adjustment?
The seating velocity area, I probably wouldn't get too different with.
Okay.
On the new cams that I designed for Jamie, that was one thing that I told him is like these things are more aggressive, but they're quieter and they have much gentler seatings. Right. So it's like the overall dynamics that are driven by the ramp design, the lift, and the duration, and then the little details of like seating velocities and things like that, or whether or not you want a constant jerk. So like on hydraulic stuff, I would take a totally different approach because the engine sees all the areas with high jerk. On a solid lifter thing, all the areas of high jerk, only the cam grinder sees, the engine doesn't see it. So I'm not worried about it.
Right. Okay.
I think next time I really got to get into the ramps.
I think so. I think defining the ramps, and I think we have to use a reference, whether it's 2J or K or B, um, using real life scenario cams, right? We can use an Ultra series, for example, an Ultra 1 versus like a BMF 1, and compare the accelerations, the lifts, the differences between those two in real time.
Yeah, I did that. So I actually have, for example, here is the measured intake of the cast cam, the measured intake of the steel cam, and
Nice.
I redesigned the steel cam. This is my redesign of the steel cam using the same lift, same duration, but then we can see what areas are different and what are the end results that are different. We can save that for next time. That's the fun stuff.
For sure.
You guys are very rooted and in a standard in the Honda community, whereas the, whereas I'm not. So I have some Honda stuff and I'm interested in Honda stuff, but like when you go through your what you have, Jamie, if you have stuff that the public doesn't have, and you're the tester, um, you know the queue up is your results. If you guys want to talk 2JZ cams for 4 weeks, I mean, I'll need a set of cams to get in a car to be able to test and display the differences. You have a certain amount of clients that are genuinely going to study and learn and understand and be better off on the other side of this series.
Yeah,
And you have another set of clients that says, "Give me what the fast guys got.
yeah,
Yeah.
I don't want to know. Just give me the good stuff." You know.
And that's why I keep touching back on some of the basic terminology that sometimes we forget. We hear it so often, and we hear lift, we hear duration, we hear lash, and just thinking of those three, I can say 90% of the industry has no idea what any of those three really mean. They can spell it, they know where to find it on a cam card, but looking at what lift and duration actually is and what we're trying to achieve, right? Where lift and duration are sort of we're looking to fill a hole, right? This entire what we're talking about here is we're looking to fill a hole in a short span. And I think we need to go one step further down in defining and just drawing and detailing that of what we're actually trying to achieve here, right? Guys know, okay, the end user may say, "I just want a big cam because it's going to give me more power," but we need to define what we're achieving here when designing a cam before
well,
we.
that's like yeah, I mean, that's so we have to decide how do we want to present that user level information versus the designer level information, because it's different, like same thing on the lash. Like i have I have some practical tricks in terms of how you can determine and play with lash on a real engine with not knowing anything about the design, just
Mhm.
going empirically. Where the like how do you find the limits of lash empirically? That's the question.
Basically open it up until the engine note changes. I mean, that's
Right. I mean, you can open it up until it starts to chop up. Once you start getting in the higher RPMs, then it's floating.
Mhm.
Right. Or if you tighten the lash, like you want more duration, you want to tighten the lash, then it's when the engine stalls. Right. So it's like, the valves get hung open because, it's too tight.
Yep.
So that's like empirically how you do it. That's very different than designing within a certain range. You know what
Sure.
I'm saying? So I could tell you, like, yeah, you could, if your lash is at 15 thousandths, you'll be at this seating velocity. But let's say you want to go to 18, 20 thousandths. It's just a matter of trying it and see if it still likes those seating velocities, because it'll get loud before it gets bad.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Makes
As you
sense.
as you open up the lash is just, the valve is seating at higher velocity, so it'll be annoyingly ticky and loud before it ever gets to like floating on the top.
Sure. And maybe I can share some examples of real dyno experiences and graphs of opening up that lash. And because again, some of the misconception is, especially in our world, some of the engine builders on our end tend to tighten up lash, assuming, and it's true, right? They achieve greater lift to a certain respect. But I have dyno graphs that will actually show the opposite. I mean, I've opened up the lash and have gained in certain areas. So I'm not sure if we want to get that granular with showing that particular data.
Sure,
And
that's we have the elements of design and analysis based off of quantitative evaluation of measured data. But then we also have like the working principles of a camshaft in terms of event timing of the valves, right?
correct.
And you're really talking about where's the ideal intake closing and where's the ideal exhaust opening primarily, right?
That's another point too, is where we need to actually get into that and talk of intake closing is probably, in my opinion, the most important part of that event,
Yeah.
where the industry looks at intake opening. All of their concentrations on where the intake opens instead of where the intake actually closes. So
Like when you say it matters when the intake is closing, I think that a cutaway engine that shows this action in place and talking through it would
Oh
be
yeah,
super key to helping people visualize, because you have a cylinder, you have limited time to fill it and go, and it's a matter of getting the valve in a controlled state, open for as long as possible, as much as possible, and closed at the right time so you can make some cylinder pressure, right, to
Yeah.
a cylinder filling. So
Mhm.
I think that it would help us a lot to have a basic illustration of what does a valve cycle look like.
Yeah, we actually have a B series cutaway with the piston and everything in it. We could put a degree wheel on it and move it to different
Okay.
positions and take static shots of where everything's at.
that'd be awesome. Just
That
to
would work.
visualize this
We
every
could
once. I mean,
make a video too.
I have to do it. I every time I'm going through this, I actually put the degree wheel in front of me. It's so often I have the degree wheel right in front of me, and I just make notes right on that degree wheel because no matter how many times you look at it, it's very easy. There's a lot happening in those 4 cycles.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the PDF that Brandon sent, it talked about that K tensioner.
Yeah, I mean, they talked about this chain slap thing. I mean, that's all visual. They have this idea of chain slap, but then they do it on an engine with no pressure in the tensioner. So they're relying on whatever the 7-pound spring inside the tensioner when the motor's totally dry, and they're trying to turn big, massive cams, and then they're like surprised when the chain kinks in the middle. It's like, come on.